Abby, I have a lot of records, and this is Vinyl Monday. So welcome to a very special episode of Vinyl Monday. It's the mid-season finale. If you're new here, hi. For the past 6 months, wow, I can't believe I've been doing this consistently for the past 6 months. Vinyl Monday has been the series where once a week I sit down and just talk about a classic album I love. If 20-minute or however many minutes long this episode is going to be isn't your thing, don't worry. I also do Vinyl Monday in 60 seconds, both here on my channel and over on my Instagram. This week's album is a biggie, there's no doubt about it. I maybe have the knowledge to do this one justice. We'll see. I definitely have the passion to make this video, and if there's anything I have more than enough of, it is the audacity. If you won't do it, then I will. This week's album, Pet Sounds by the Beach Boys. Congrats to those who guessed this one. Remember, if you want to play along, all you gotta do is check out my community tab. That's where we play the little game of what album I'm going to cover next. I also post polls and behind the scenes stuff over there. Alright, let's take the plastic off. This is the 1972 press on Brother/Reprise Records, and it was packaged with the Carl and the Passions record. This is one of the oddities in my collection. It has So Tough in stereo, but Pet Sounds in mono. I will get to the ins and outs of Pet Sounds in mono and why you should seek out Pet Sounds in mono later on in this video. And here we have some of the worst album art in all of music history. I mean, really? Could we not have done any better than this? Given the Exotica influence on this record, I would have loved to see something a little more tropical, like what they did with the Smiley Smile cover. The man responsible for this is photographer George German. He clearly took the assignment way too seriously, bringing the Beach Boys to the children's area of the San Diego Zoo to feed the animals. I think Mike Love summed it up perfectly. He said, and I quote, "It was bizarre. It was a bizarre situation." Clearly my copy does not have anywhere close to the original Pet Sounds art, because on the reverse, we have So Tough. And on the gatefold, which is very, very fragile, we have track listings for both. So I'll be showing you photos here-ish of what the original art looks like. We have quite the cast and crew appearing on Pet Sounds, so I'm gonna do my best to list off as many prominent names as I possibly can. We of course have to start with the Beach Boys, comprising of the brothers Wilson, Brian, Carl, and Dennis, their cousin Mike Love, and their friend from high school, Al Jardine. I need to remember Terry Aiken, Tony Asher. Terry Aiken, Tony Asher. It's so easy to screw them up because they both start with T's and A's. This album was produced and composed by Brian Wilson, with principal lyricist Tony Asher. We also have Terry Aiken credited for Hang On To Your I Mean I Know There's an Answer. Totally not gonna screw that up all episode. We have a whole litany of guests on this thing, truly too many to name. Producer of the Laurel Canyon Greats, Terry Melker, picks up the tambourine on a couple tracks, and we actually don't know who plays the tambourine on Sloop John B. We know his first name was Tony, but I guess nobody bothered to write the rest down. And I truly don't blame them for that hiccup. There were so many people on this album. The studio truly was like a revolving door. Brian's first wife, Marilyn, may or may not be on You Still Believe in Me. It's unclear. Nobody seems to know who's misremembering what. Instrumentation was provided by the Wrecking Crew. They included, but were not limited to, such names as Glenn Campbell, Larry Knechtel, Jim and Paul Horn, Carol Kay, and Jim Gordon, who was playing the cups. Yes, that Jim Gordon. It's all connected, people! The Wrecking Crew was used by Phil Spector and all of the people he produced for, as well as channel favorites, the Monkees. Roll transition! I have never, ever been happier that my bumper theme is Circle Sky. Now, this is going to be a far from comprehensive overview of the history of pet sounds. That would be impossible for me to compile in just 2 weeks. Instead, I'm going to give you all the information you need to understand what went into this album. I'm going to try and help you understand the music of Pet Sounds by walking you through an abridged history. So the story of Pet Sounds begins in 2 places. In December of 1964, Brian Wilson quits touring with the Beach Boys. He's kind of this awkward, brainy guy who isn't even that keen on the beach, let alone being a public figure. He was never about the whole touring thing, it was all about the music. Similar to the musical journey Paul McCartney would be going on in 1966, throughout 65, Brian was consuming a wide array of music while no longer touring. You gotta have something to fill your time with, right? He was inspired by the burgeoning genre of psych, only the very, very beginning stages of that though. Classical music like Bach, as well as exotica. This was a genre of music arguably invented by Les Baxter's Ritual of the Savage and popularized by Martin Denny and the Arthur Lyman Group. Brian was also driven by his friendly competition with the Beatles. Here is where I drop quite possibly one of my hottest musical takes. It was never Beatles versus Stones. It was always Lennon-McCartney versus Brian Wilson. In December of 1965, the Beatles release Rubber Soul. Brian feels it is a complete musical statement, an entirely sonically and thematically cohesive body of work. But wait a minute, that's not Rubber Soul at all. Fuck, I forgot to take out my Rubber Soul. Where is my Rubber Soul? Here is my Rubber Soul. Thank you. With Rubber Soul, you're getting a mixed bag of everything from classic Beatles rock tunes to folk to psych and everything in between. Unless, of course, you're talking about this Rubber Soul. Capitol mucked with the track listing to make Rubber Soul a folk album to, capitalize on the Beatles and the Byrds and all of them really taking over pop music. The original Rubber Soul track listing wouldn't make landfall in the States until the 70s. So for now, all we know is this. I never thought Bob Dylan's Mr. Tambourine Man would be indirectly responsible for one of the greatest pop albums ever written, but here we are. Also, can we appreciate the fact that the 60s played out the way they did, due in part to 3 Gemini men? Geminis stay winning. Brian soon meets Tony Asher at the studio. There's a few different versions of how this story went, so I'm giving you the version both Brian and Tony have told. Tony is in advertising. He's at the studio to record some commercial jingles. He runs into Brian Wilson on a coffee break and is totally starstruck. I'm sure he was like, oh my god, Brian Wilson is right here, and did he just put like 5 sugars in his coffee? Brian offered to play Tony some music, and they really hit it off. Apparently this was something that Brian would do a lot. He would invite pretty much anyone who walked through the studio doors to listen to something he was working on. He would even do this with the delivery guys. God, I love this man. The first song Brian and Tony wrote together was God Only Knows. It came together in just 45 minutes and was the fastest a song had ever come together for Brian. Brian asked Carl to sing it. He wrote the song with his little brother's voice in mind. He just wanted him to have his turn singing lead. Listening to takes of this one on the Pet Sound sessions, you hear Brian calling out directions to the crew, and it's the sweetest thing. We also have Al DeLory playing the harpsichord, deciding that that middle break should be played staccato. But before we hear God Only Knows, or any other eventual Pet Sounds material, we get Sloop John B. It was recorded sometime in the back half of '65 and released in the spring of '66. We also got Brian's first solo song, Caroline No. Pet Sounds was recorded in 4 months across 4 different studios: United Western, Gold Star, Columbia, and one of the locations I have mentioned the most on Vinyl Monday, by far, Sunset Sound in LA. Enter the Wrecking Crew, a group of over 40 session musicians brought in to play Brian's arrangements. Wouldn't It Be Nice took 21 takes to get the instrumental right. The syncopation was really tripping the crew up, especially drummer Hal Blaine. But the song that went through the most iterations was I Know There's an Answer. It was inspired by Brian's experiences on psychedelics and originally titled Let Go of Your Ego. Maybe? Possibly. It's called Let Go of Your Ego in Pet Sounds sessions, but I'm not sure if that was just Brian misspeaking or not. It's hilarious hearing no one know what this song is called, not even Brian. It was then rewritten as a critique of those who use psychedelics called Hang On to Your Ego. This was done because Mike refused to sing the original version. Then it was rewritten again as I Know There's an Answer at the behest of the label. I guess they weren't crazy about the whole ego death thing. A recurring theme through Pet Sounds recording is Brian not knowing how to put down his ideas on paper, but absolutely knowing how to vocalize them. He articulated things so well for his players, even if they had no clue what it was they were supposed to be doing. These songs have eclectic and sometimes peculiar things written in to reflect Brian's wide range of musical influences. We have psych instruments like the theremin. No one knew how this instrument worked when they brought it into the studio. They were just making it up as they went along. We have bicycle bells, horns, cups and soda cans, and we have a paperclip used to play piano strings. The themes of Pet Sounds writing include lost love, nostalgia, coming of age, social alienation, and spirituality. Goodbye surfing, hello God. In the words of the man himself, I believe that God is music. When you make music, that's God talking to you. Now, fans are used to songs about surfing cars and girls. I'm gonna say that in one word forever now, because I've written it out so many times in these notes. Very soon, through Pet Sounds, this image would be torn down, exposing a totally vulnerable side of the Beach Boys that fans had rarely heard before. But there was a taste of this in '65 through my personal favorite Beach Boys song, She Knows Me Too Well. Here is my really weird reissue of the Beach Boys today. I found this at an antique store. It came in a set with an equally weird reissue of Shut Down 2. A notable non-album product of the Pet Sounds sessions was a little song called Good Vibrations. Now, Capitol really wanted Good Vibrations as a single, and they really wanted it to make the Pet Sounds track listing. But Brian gave Capitol Sloop John B instead. Brian was saving Good Vibrations for something. Recording Pet Sounds was really expensive. This cost over $500,000 in today's money to make. High-cost sessions with artistically ambitious material meant that the label and the Beach Boys team were all kind of wary of this. It was a huge risk to take, but Brian persisted with his vision, backed by Carl. I'm gonna read this excerpt from Brian's liner notes for the Pet Sounds sessions. Pet Sounds was a heart and soul album. I worked very hard on it. When we were making Pet Sounds, we were absolutely positive we were cutting a milestone record. Carl and I knew for sure we were into something heavier than hell, and we just went with it. The track listing of Pet Sounds goes as follows. Opening up side 1, we have Wouldn't It Be Nice, followed by You Still Believe in Me. Then That's Not Me, followed by Don't Talk with the subtitle Put Your Head on My Shoulder. Next is I'm Waiting for the Day, followed by an instrumental piece, Let's Go Away for a While. Side 1 is rounded out with Sloop John B., an arrangement of a Bahamian folk song. Opening up side 2, we have, God Only Knows! I can't contain my excitement for this one, I'm sorry. Followed by I Know There's an Answer. Or Hang On to Your Ego, or whatever the hell it is. Then Here Today, followed by I Just Wasn't Made for These Times. We have another instrumental piece, the title track, Pet Sounds, and the album is closed out with Caroline No. Pet Sounds was released in May of 1966. Wouldn't It Be Nice, backed by God Only Knows, was released as the promo single in July. In the UK, Pet Sounds was a smashing success. This thing charted for like 6 months straight, caught like wildfire over there. As for the US, things were not as easy. This record underperformed massively in the eyes of Capitol. Remember, they poured over $500,000 into this. If they're gonna fund one of the most expensive album productions to date, they want it to pay off. Changing up like this at this stage in their career was a huge risk for the Beach Boys, and sales reflected that. You have to remember who their label mates are as well. Though they were on Parlophone in their home country, Capitol was the US label of the Beatles. These guys slung records like nobody's business, no matter what it was. Pet Sounds lost out on the top of the charts in the US. It lost out on Grammy nominations. It was met with lukewarm critical reception and alienated a decent chunk of the Beach Boys fan base. This wishy-washy reception lit a fire under Brian's ass to write something even bigger and better than Pet Sounds. This also would not go so well for him. The best way I can describe Smile production in the time frame that I have, this is a Pet Sounds video, I can't really be going into detail about Smile. It was like pulling a tiny thread on a sweater that unravels the whole thing in the worst way. What alienated some upon Pet Sounds' release would convert legions of fans in the decades to follow. This thing has received a mass reappraisal, the likes of which few other albums have ever seen. This was one of the albums that legitimized pop music as an art form, and I feel comfortable saying that considering the sheer amount of artists and albums this thing has influenced. Everything from Odyssey and Oracle to Hunky Dory can trace some origin point back to Pet Sounds. Perhaps the most famous of which being Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Paul McCartney hears this record, was blown away, and combined that inspiration with pretty much every other inspiration under the sun to create this. Pet Sounds is still being referenced today through groups like Fleet Foxes, Panda Bear, hell, Panic at the Disco? Pretty odd is a 21st century answer to Pet Sounds. Ryan Ross is basically the Brian Wilson of Panic at the Disco. And Brendan Urie is the Mike Love of Panic at the Disco. Sunshine pop revival groups like the Melons are incorporating Pet Sounds elements into their work. If there's any takeaway from this chapter of the video, listen to the Melons. And in one of the most creative uses of a sample I have ever heard, Vapor Trap producer Blank Banshee chopped up I Just Wasn't Made for These Times and incorporated it into the Blank Banshee Zero record. I never get to pull this one out unless I'm talking about Pet Sounds. This is definitely another one of the oddities of my collection. I'm not always crazy about what Rolling Stone magazine has to say, but I think Jordan Runtagh summed up Pet Sounds perfectly in the 50th anniversary retrospective piece. He said, "Pet Sounds is shorthand for a fully realized artistic vision that owes little to trends and everything to the soul." That little piece might be some indication, but What do I think of Pet Sounds? So, going in, it has proven to be exceedingly difficult to have independent thoughts about Pet Sounds because it's so ingrained in my everyday life. I listen to this while I'm getting ready in the morning, while I'm making food, getting my day going. I listened to it while I walked my dog the other day. I listen to this in the shower when I'm getting ready for bed. This is one of the albums in my everyday listening rotation. Again, this will be far from comprehensive. If I were to sit here dissecting every musical element of Pet Sounds, we would be here for well over 2 hours. Hell, you could teach a whole 13-week college course about Pet Sounds, 1 week for each song. I'll start this part of the video off by saying this was the record that made me love the Beach Boys. It blows my mind that Brian Wilson was my age when he was producing this. What makes Pet Sounds so special? First off, that instrumentation. The Wrecking Crew were a godsend. They executed all of Brian's wacky ideas to a T. Carol Kay is for sure the MVP of the bunch. Her licks on stuff like Here Today are masterworks. I also love that big timpani sound on I'm Waiting for the Day. You know, that bum, 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 ba-da-bum. Oh my god, I sound just like Brian sounding that out. He's just like me, for real. Another reason why is Pet Sounds' composition. A hallmark of the Beach Boys are those sweeping vocal rounds, right? We get them on You Still Believe in Me. We don't get them on Don't Talk. I will come back to that song later. Let's Go Away for a While is the dream wedding song. There, I said it, how someone captured love and bottled it up in a song without any words is just beyond me. And I'm not kidding when I say that this moment on Here Today is one of my favorite moments on any album ever. Here Today is sloppy, but it works for that reason. If the whole album were as done up as it is, and there were no points that were a little freer, then it might get stale. Here Today is special with all its little hiccups and the chatter in the background, the coughing. It makes it feel really in the moment. This album proves Brian has an ear like no one else. His style is just about as melodic as it gets. Of course, you have those impossible key changes. They don't call it the key of Brian for nothing. And those super, super dense vocal harmonies, they're all packed together so tightly that if one person were to be even slightly off on that syncopation or just slightly flat, the whole thing would just fall to pieces. These are demanding arrangements for both players and singers, which got me thinking that Brian arranges instruments like one would arrange for the voice. For the most part, you could swap these instrument parts out for vocals and vice versa. Proof of this lies in the tracking vocals of Don't Talk. I never truly appreciated Don't Talk until I heard these rough vocals. Double-tracked 4 or 5-part harmony meant maybe for vocals, but probably for the strings. It was this moment right here that unlocked all of Pet Sounds for me. It all seemed so inaccessible before, like, come on, it's motherfucking Pet Sounds. So having Brian kind of hold my hand through the construction of a song from the ground up, it was revelatory. Never mind all the genius nonsense. At the heart of it all, Brian really is just some guy, and that shows in another very special part of Pet Sounds, its themes. Let's talk about Caroline No. I cry alone at night to this one. Before I get too far into Caroline, I'm gonna point out a line in a different song that serves as kind of the thesis for the whole album. It's from That's Not Me, and it goes, I went through all kinds of changes, took a look at myself, and said that's not me. Caroline is about a man mourning a former lover's youth, not accepting her changing as she grows up. So there's this invisible string from That's Not Me all the way to the end of the record, Caroline No, saying, I'm not comfortable with how I've changed, therefore you cannot change either. It's selfish, but the composition of the song makes it sweet and sorrowful, longing to reanimate that old version of her. It fucks with your head. That's the power of music. As for I Just Wasn't Made for These Times, I've cried alone at night to this one for very different reasons. I was a strange child. I did not know I was a strange child. I truly had no idea why I was being gawked at as a kid and then ostracized so hard as a teen. Oh my god, you wouldn't believe. Over the years, it's taken different shapes, due in part to trying to squeeze myself down into little boxes in hopes to assimilate. It'd work for a little while, I'd be tentatively accepted, but inevitably things just wouldn't fit and I'd be right back at square one again. So now, whenever I put myself out there, I'm a scared little kid again. Whenever I make a genuine interpersonal connection, I am always waiting for the other shoe to drop. I Just Wasn't Made for These Times is sensitivity, the likes of which we have never seen from the Beach Boys, not even on She Knows Me Too Well. It's a window right into the soul. Listen, some rich-sounding albums, some very highly produced records, they get so technical that they lose their feeling. Pet Sounds never leaves you craving more substance, and it never gets so sophisticated that it's sterile. If anything, I crave more of it because it's so criminally short. All of this comes together on God Only Knows. It's the perfect pop song. Say it's one of two, alongside Say a Little Prayer by Aretha. This song does so much. Its structure really maximizes that 3-ish minutes, under 3 minutes actually, the way few other songs do. The instrumentation. Who the hell else was doing this in 1966? That's right, no one. The horse hoof flops, sleigh bells, strings, this little flute flourish right here. I love that. Brian was right about Carl singing this song. Carl really was the perfect choice. His voice is just delicate and vulnerable enough for this delivery. And as for the writing, love songs are all well and good. The Beach Boys sure do have a lot of them. But if you ask me, all the best love songs write about the uncertainty of love. You have Something by the Beatles. You're asking me, will my love grow? I don't know. Stick around, it may show. Kathy's Song by Simon and Garfunkel. I have come to doubt all I once held as true. I stand alone without beliefs. The only truth I know is you. God Only Knows cuts to the core of that in the first line of the song. I may not always love you. It marks the tonal shift in the album. The first side and the first half of God Only Knows is the optimism of new love, new life, opportunity. And then in the second half of God Only Knows, we transfer over to desperation. God Only Knows is also why you should seek out Pet Sounds in mono. See, when this thing was mixed over to stereo, some vocal parts were lost as they were dubbed right onto the mono mix. Kind of like that horn part in the Zombies' This Will Be Our Year. So no stereo mix of that song will truly be what Brian intended. Thou shalt listen to the music As the artist originally intended, this is not a callback to Dark Side at all. There are plenty other special moments on Pet Sounds that I can't put into any of the categories I listed above. The incidental moments, that banjo false start and let go of and hang on to I know there's a whatever this thing is called, someone coughing and the chatter heard in Here Today, and the delivery of "This is the worst trip I've ever been on" in Sloop John B. This is a painfully earnest album that still has a sense of humor. Before listening to Pet Sounds for this video, I never took into account maybe the most oddball moment on this record, the train passing at the end of Caroline No. Nostalgia for lost youth and love is a huge part of Pet Sounds. This might be a stretch, okay? I realize some of my interpretations are a little out there, but that train passing, to me, it's a sonic representation of the gravity of what you feel and just how many memories come flooding in at the slightest nudge. It can be from a song, a smell, the t-shirt worn by a stranger passing you by on the street, or a train crossing the tracks. That train passing is one of the most magical moments on Pet Sounds. Though if we're speaking about the most oddball song overall, I am gonna have to hand that to Sloop John B. It seems like an odd addition considering this album's departure from Surfing Cars and Girls. But it's a really fun interpretation of a folk song. It's one of the wildest arrangements on here, turning a simple 3-chord tune into something so lush with so many tiny moving parts. And that's what Pet Sounds is all about. With this album, Brian Wilson teamed up with Tony Asher, the Beach Boys, and the Wrecking Crew to create the perfect album, as Brian has said. Something that could capture spiritual love that couldn't be found anywhere else in the world. And they did it. This right here is just about as close to a perfect pop album as you can get. If Brian's quote from the session's liner notes earlier in this video is any indication, Pet Sounds is an example of the indomitable spirit of man, not unlike Dark Side. The guys of Pink Floyd were watching Monty Python in the studio and ad-libbing their way through solos. They had no idea they had a generation-defining album on their hands. The difference here is Brian and Carl knew with Pet Sounds. This album is an example of what happens when you go after something with everything you've got. When you have that much tenacity, heart, and soul, there's no way the product can't be special. It's just too whole to fail. Pet Sounds is everything pop music should be, and it's everything pop music can do. My personal favorites on this one are Don't Talk, Let's Go Away for a While, God Only Knows, Here Today, I Just Wasn't Made for These Times, and Caroline No. If you want to keep up with all of my favorites from all of the Vinyl Mondays, I have a Spotify playlist linked in my description. I update it every week. Whew, and that is it. That is the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds. What do you think of this album? Leave a comment letting me know. I love hearing what you guys have to say about albums that I love, and there truly is no shortage of things to say about Pet Sounds. And if you like what I do here, you should like this video and subscribe to my channel. I post new episodes of Vinyl Monday every Monday morning at 11 a.m. Thank you so much for watching the Vinyl Monday mid-season special, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye!